The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow. A show for all who are on the journey to discover the truths about their identity, history, culture, politics, spirituality, and family relationships. This is a show for the Black Freedom Movement and the Black Power generation and the hip-hop generation, including Black Lives Matter and associate activists, all of whom are seeking change. Dr. Oba Tashaka and his guests are dropping knowledge and insight from his successful organizing, research, writings, and innovative thoughts, the best of which have piped into God's mind to lift you up higher and higher. To the bosses, OGs, rappers, influencers, and those looking to evolve from the constraints of misinformation and miseducation to build a foundation for personal growth, love, and mental freedom. Check out the wisdom of the OR. Yeah, that's the original revolutionary, Oba T, who inspired 1 million black men with his rousing speech at the Million Man March, and who continues to fight, write, and speak the truth. Dr. Oba Tashaka is one of the deepest deep thinkers in the world today. A quote by Dr. Asa Hilliard. Dr. Oba Tashaka, then Bill Bradley, was the best leader organizer in the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE. An endorsement from Dr. George Wiley, Associate Director of National CORE and the best organizer blacks produced in the 1970s as the organizer of the National Welfare Rights Organization. The Dr. Oba Tashaka Show. Free your mind, and the rest will follow.
Greetings. How's everybody doing? Greetings to the Dr. Oba Tashaka Show family. I have a little treat for you today. It's kind of like if you've got a food menu, you always have your best meal. And hopefully I've got some of the best meal for this show for today to address a serious problem that faces our people. For people who are new to the show, hit the red button, which is the subscriber button, and hit the like button continuously at different points, and this will help draw more viewers to the show. It appears that a lot of people liked the last show on the 10,000 year period of Kemetic history and the inspiration of the Anu for developing it. And this is going to be an extension of that. First, before getting into the show, I want to say that in the future, we're going to be getting into the famine that is going on and the war that is going on in the Sudan, which has been whited out of the media because this media doesn't care about African people or African lives, and particularly Black lives. To Wolf Manlu, salutations to you, brother. Brother Ugawa, one of the hardest working people in the AfroNet business. Big help for me. Sister Gloria Briscoe, be contacting you because I want you on one of our shows soon. So put up an email address or something where we can reach you. To Ross Mella, Sankofa, greetings to you. um, and Stephen McKenzie, and Terry Lynn Hagens. Greetings to you and others who will be coming on. And to Sister Peggy Parks Miller, who has just come on, greetings to you. So in the future, we'll be going into the Sudan and what we can do to give people their support. It's both a civil war, it's a genocide, and there are some things we can do to be supportive of the people in the Sudan who started what was a people's-based revolution, where people were going block by block and really building power after overthrowing a military government there. And then now we have this struggle for power between two groups that have Arab backing in certain cases and other kinds of backing, and where the people are being discarded. So we need to throw light on that and give the support that we can to the people of the Sudan. And for the ongoing genocide that's going on in Gaza, the United States is as much responsible for it as Israel, because they're providing the weapons and have shown no care at all for the Palestinian people. It's over 200,000 Palestinians who have died. And if you think that doesn't have anything to do with us, then you haven't been looking at your own history. And the Israeli Zionist government is doing this because they had an apt opportunity to, and the poor leadership of the Palestinians gave it to them, because their move was not a smart move to begin with, though they have the right to resist in a way that it's not going to bring on the maximum harm to your people. But I ain't blaming them for this. This is Israel, and Zionism. But if you are a leader, one of the rules in strategy is a strategy should produce minimum casualties for your people. And if you put forward a strategy at a time in which you've got the most reactionary government the Israelis have ever had, what do you expect as a reaction? And don't talk about geopolitical reasons as the reasons for launching this strategy, not when 200,000 people end up dead. That's bad leadership. But worse, it's the fascist state of Israel and the United States backing of it that is the real problem. And the Palestinian people deserve our support in every way. They've been allies of us. For those who want to use the Arabs as the excuse because the Arabs brought on a slave trade, therefore you don't need to be that concerned about the Palestinians. Well, first of all, that's used in a period that goes back thousands of years for your justification for what you're going to do right now, when in fact, if we're looking at it right now, the Palestinians were among the first to join us in our struggles that kick off giving life to an anti-police movement. And they were right on the lines. But even if they weren't, they deserve our support. This is another subject. One reason why I've been in this movement for 63 years and healthy. I just went back and got my blood work up, and my doctor said, excellent health. I should be. I'm following a strategy to live past 100, healthy. And I'm not like most old Blacks who say old age is misery. Or as the former chair of Black Studies said, old age is the shits. Because if you ain't taking care of your health, you're going through pain. You got diabetes, you got high blood pressure, you got all this stuff, most of which is preventable. And by the way, we had a birthday party for one of the leaders of the San Francisco Black Freedom and Black Power movement last Sunday at Jeffries, which is a jazz club run by a very beautiful brother, Jeffries, over 6'5", real nice brother. He used to have a club called the Dock of the Bay in Oakland. And Will Essery was celebrating his 96th birthday. And he was chair of San Francisco Core before me and is still as sharp as 3 or 4 razor blades, and got him an excellent wife. They've been married 56 years. And so it was a real pleasure. If you go to my Facebook page, you'll see a picture of one of the people that went to the birthday party for Will Essery. And he's there taking a picture with him. And so that was a real pleasure. But Norman Brown, who was about 3 years older than me, I've just turned 85, we were talking about how healthy it is to be engaged in a Black liberation movement that kicks ass and wins. It's not good to lose. It can be bad for your health. And I've been in nothing but winning movements. So you don't hear me doing the woe is me, white supremacy, because the white boy's in decline. Haven't you noticed? The industrial power of the world is now in China. Got over 2/3 of the world's industrial power. China's rising. Africa has got over 1 billion people. Asia today, Africa tomorrow, and you doubtful Thomases will say, I don't know about Africa. Well, that's a poor frog that doesn't know about its own pond. Pretty soon, 1 in 3 people on the planet is going to be African, and you don't think some power comes from that? We always negate everything that's powerful because we're caught in this over-worship of the white boy. The slave mentality that Dr. Nathan Hare described as the over-identification with white people. I come out of a family where my father was fighting the Klan with his fist when he was 12 years old. I told the story before. I'm not going to go through it. I just simply say, as a 12-year-old working a plantation in Orange, Texas, he kicked the behind of the owner of the plantation's son. And, just to briefly recount this for new people, that evening, the owner came to, and, he's called master because it was like slavery, sharecropping. It was a part of the 1876 Hayes-Tilden Compromise deal, which you're faced with right now. Those of you that deny it and those of you that's watched the show and don't want to hear about fascism, well, you need to hear about what's facing you. Fascism is on the agenda, and if you don't do what you can to make sure that Project 2025 is defeated, then what is the point of you studying history when history is staring your Black behind in your face? So the old white boy came to my great-grandfather's shack, I'm sure it was, and told him that if your grandson does that again, we're going to kill him. And my father told me the story, and my great-grandfather said, yes, sir, and spit out some tobacco. When he left, my great-grandfather told my father, he said, WH, because in the South, particularly in Texas, you get known by your initials. And my father, William Henry. In my slave name period, mine was William Henry Bradley Jr. My father was William Henry Bradley, which traces back to 1860 in Virginia. We have our family tree. It goes back, traced back to 1860, but it actually goes back to the 1700s. Our people come from Madagascar. My great aunt that lived past 100 kept that record. And so he told my father, my great-grandfather, he said, WH, I know how you feel, but this is a white man's world. You do it again, they're going to kill you, my father said. He knew what he was telling me was the truth, he said of himself. He also knew if it happened again, he'd do the same thing. And so the next day, because my father was 12, he was the fighter in the family. He was the younger child. He defended his older brothers and older sisters against whites, and they were very light complexion, but because they were black, and against blacks because they were too light. My father was a fighter. As my cousin David Johnson said, who's very much like him, he had fire in his belly. Next day, he's pulling his cart full of cotton. He's 12 years old doing the work of a grown man. And my father was not that tall. He was maybe 5'8" or 5'9". But he had these hands, if you looked at these hands. But at 12 years old, he's pulling this full wagon of cotton to the barn. And this time, it's what they call the old master. I've told this story before. Some have heard it, but for those that haven't, it's worth revisiting because my father was the baddest man I ever knew. Bad is good. Best man I ever knew. A ladies' man, didn't play around. The ladies loved him because he was a real man and a man's man. He was both. I struggled to get that first part together. I hope I am. I'm working on it. My father was good at both at a very young age. And so this time, here's old so-called master. He's in front of him. And my father said I had some rocks in my pocket. I was getting ready to fight and run, because he knew the Klan was coming. The Klan had come to threaten to lynch him before, but he was so small, they were too damn embarrassed to do anything because he had been kicking white boys' behinds, and they're looking at this little tiny guy. He was, 12 years old. And so this time, the white boys in front of him. This is like slavery days, Now in the South, you're a boy for 100 years after you're dead, and you're a girl in the eyes of whites. For blacks, Mr. was always the term you used for us, and Mrs. and Sir, when blacks were talking to each other. But so this time, my father's in front of, he's the white boy's in front of him, and the white boy says words you never hear coming out of a white boy's mouth. How you doing, Mr. WH? And my father said, fine. He said, how you like to come to work for me? See, this white boy had thought about killing my father. And then he said, well, this guy's got some guts. He says, how you like to come work for me? And my father said, what did it involve? He said, it don't involve picking cotton. Then, of course, the next question, what does it pay? Double what you pay for that hard work you're doing. My father said, fine. That was my father. He refused to fight in World War II. He was self-educated, didn't have a day of school. My sister just recently told me that. My mother suspected that, But he was the best read, best informed person I ever knew. Him and Malcolm were very similar. Malcolm was a professional revolutionary. My father was a natural revolutionary. And he used brass knuckles on anybody that he didn't have an edge on. He didn't use a gun because he didn't want to go to jail. He didn't use a knife either, So that was my father. You might say I'm that way because of that. Actually, I appreciated all his knockout stories because he was a longshoreman in the day, and he was a bouncer at night for the Forbidden City, a nightclub owned by Chinese Americans, by a guy named Charlie Lowe. I used to caddy for him when he played golf. Guy owned horses, and he had all these pretty Chinese girls who were performing. And during World War II, this was a major club in Chinatown. And my mother always said my father didn't need two jobs. He was a longshoreman. Longshoremen made good money. We had a house. My father bought him a new Buick, every 3 or 4 years, those were some pretty ass cars too. You know what I mean? Big, long, you know what I mean? Real pretty. But my sister, I've told this before, but for people that are new to the show, I'm going to tell it again. My sister said the reason my father took that second job as a bouncer is he could legally kick the behinds of white people. He had fire in his belly. He had to release it. You know what I mean? So he refused to fight in World War II. Why is he going to fight for a country that's given us hell? So I had that example, but my awakening came through the Black freedom movement because I got the part of kicking the white boys behind, but I didn't get the politics until I joined the Black freedom movement that really freed my mind to free my behind. And that's the key to everything else that's going on with me. So I just want to bring my father in because he was a part of a generation that had the odds against him. Things shifted with my generation. So anyone who's running around here talking this white supremacy talk now, you need to get your head straight. You've been wielding power for quite a while in this country. Yeah, not all the power, but key power. You ended Jim Crow. You ended the new slavery of enslaving blacks through states that occurred with the 1876 Hayes-Tilden Compromise. You did that. And the right wing knows it. And they consider it to be the defeat that they suffered. And a good part of Trumpism is to try and bring back the Make America Great days where whites ruled and blacks just followed. We're not in that position anymore. So what I'm going to be discussing today is about how this power can be used to take care of business to rebuild our families and communities. But before that, I want to announce see, one of the things that kept me going is balance. And so I've been organizing now 64 years, no let up and no defeats. I've just talked about a few. I've been in many battles and lost none of them. And it's not just because of me, it's because of the power shift in the world. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But also, one of the reasons why my health is good is balance, baby, balance. You didn't see me week before last because my wife and I, we went down to Monterey for the Monterey Jazz Festival, the longest standing jazz festival in the United States. We went a week early just to hang out at a little place called Pacific Grove that's right on the ocean. And this ocean is basically clean. It's not polluted like most of the oceans in the United States. And I got me, we have a place where we stay that's right across the street from the ocean. So that's one of the things that I've done since 72 is built in various other things that, provide balance to life. You know what I mean? Keeps you healthy. It ain't just about the struggle. The struggle is the most important thing, but you got to have joy in your life, love in your life, things you do that you enjoy. So we got to enjoy the Monterey Jazz Festival and Mavis Staples, because the new artistic director, who's a brother, he's worked in the blues, spiritual blues, into jazz. And so he didn't just have jazz musicians, Joshua Redman, for example, perform, and many others. But he also had the Blind Boys from Alabama. I like that. Some people that don't understand that jazz is the blues and the blues is the spirituals and the spirituals is the blues. And there's a whole philosophy behind that that's based on a sacred secular union. They'll say, well, I'm in a jazz festival. What am I hearing this for? Well, that's a foundation, baby. It's the spirit up in there. So we enjoyed that and had a good time. My wife did. She's her favorite music is jazz, and she's global because she's born in Britain. Her people are from Barbados, raised in Barbados, and then came to the U.S. when hip hop was just kicking off. She knows music inside out. It's one of the things, many things we have in common. So I'm just saying that to say that in your life, you should be integrating joy. But of course, if you're down in the mood of depression, oh, this white boy, then probably you'll deprive yourself of this opportunity. But one of the best things, Norman Brown and I, the brother that woke me up, was saying, you know, a Will Ussery is 96 years old. And Norman is, I'm 85, he's around 87. We're all in good health. Why is that? It's healthy to fight your oppressor, because if you're oppressed, there's only one thing you should be doing, and that's fighting. And then the key to that is winning, victories. And so Will Ussery, who passed the baton on to me, he has that history. And so it's healthy to be in a good fight. So I just want to say that, you know, do those things that give you joy in life. And the most important is to have somebody around you love. You know, that's real important. I also want to say that for people in the Bay Area, and I'm going to post this on our page here, each year, except when COVID came down, my wife and I, we go to a New Year's Eve gala. And it's here in the Bay Area. And it's sponsored for the last number of years we've been going. It's sponsored by the West Coast Blues Society, led by a beautiful brother named Ronnie Stewart. And it's the only blues society in the United States that is Black organized, Black led. All these other blues societies are white. And so what's going to be happening, and I'm saying this for people in the Bay Area, there's going to be a New Year's Eve gala 2024, December 31st, 2024, and it's going to be at the Concord Plaza Hotel. Concord is an area in the Bay Area, which is a real classy hotel. And Ronnie Stewart is also a chef, though he's not going to be cooking for this. He's going to have master chefs doing this. It's going to have, and by the way, this is a eat all you can eat banquet. Most places you go, it's a hotel thing, and they're giving you their little menu, and it's white people cooking the food, so you know how it tastes. Now, this is soul cuisine, cooked by soul brothers and sisters, and the food is fried chicken, oxtails, and salmon. You get 3 choices of meat: black-eyed peas, potato salad, greens, mac and cheese, cornbread, peach cobbler, chocolate cake, and cheesecake. And since I usually try and get the largest number of people to come because I want to help Ronnie out, and I have one thing that I insist on, that he gives our table the proximity to the door where you go in to eat. So I'm the first one to get in that line to get some food. You know what I mean? So I'm saying that people who are interested from the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland, Bay Area, check this out. You should go. And the fee is reasonable. It's a nice hotel if you stay overnight, and it's reasonable. And you should go. And so I'll be posting this. And if you decide to go, email me and let me know. But when you tell Ronnie Stewart you're coming, tell him that you got this information from the Dr. Oba Tashaka show. So that's a little announcement. Some people say, wow, he talking about that on this show. Hey, this is one of the classiest events going, and it's going to be a live band doing rhythm and blues music, because that's what you dance to. Now, the topic for today is lessons from Ancient Kemet for Rebuilding Black Families. This had to be a short topic because this is really much more than just rebuilding Black families. Because if you rebuild Black families, you rebuild Black communities. And if you rebuild Black communities, you're rebuilding Black societies. And this is not just about Blacks in the US, it's about Africans globally. But I'll focus on the US. And guess what? You're going to find out this has major implications for the United States as a whole. For this analysis, I'm using two major Adunoso tools. Adunoso, as I pointed out before, is a key principle in Dogon philosophy. Aduno and So. So is word Aduno, universe, word of the universe. And so what I'll be discussing comes from this framework of Dogon philosophy that really springs from God's mind, because the two things that I'll be using come directly from God's mind. And Adunoso, as I pointed out before, is an initiate in the Dogon system indirectly. I didn't go to Dogon country. I was not initiated by Dogon masters, but it was indirect initiation. Just as I apprenticed under Malcolm, but only met him once. It was indirect initiation. Apprenticed under Garvey, he died a year after I was born, and directly apprenticed under John Henry Clark and Jacob Carruthers, two great masters. But one of the things that I got in my Dogon immersion, because literally when you go through African systems, it's an initiation process that transforms your attitudes, thoughts, and behaviors, your mind, and your spirit. And it's a gradual process that takes years to undergo. And so one of the things I learned from the Dogon is that the smallest part of their philosophy reveals the whole. And I call this, because it was my internalization of this that led me to conclude this, that in anything is everything. So the two tools I'm going to use, one is the family tool, the other is the tool for analyzing the state we're in right now. Both of these come from God. People who have watched the show have heard some of this before, but you're going to get it on another level, because this is applying this to rebuilding our people today. Some of us who are in the movement, some of us are living in the past. We're doing the same things the Panthers did. Doing some of, if you're into the civil rights piece, some of the same slogans that King had. This is a different set of circumstances we're dealing with right now. We need to make the past serve the present, but we need to deal with the realities that we are facing today. And so the Adunoso tools that I'm going to be using, which in each part describe a whole, are two key tools that are central for reviving our people, empowering us, and African people globally. And it will provide an analysis that explains the predicament that whites are in and many others are in the world today. And this comes from being able to pipe into God's mind. So these two tools, as I've explained before, come directly from God. The historical breakthrough, which I think is the most important historical breakthrough that we've made so far, that Dr. Theophil Obenga, after reading my book, Return to the African Mother Principle, of Male and Female Equality, this book here, Dr. Obinga said the term that I use to describe African families, which is one of the two aduna, so philosophical principles that I'm going to use, Dr. Obinga said that that term should be in the dictionary. And he said, Return to the African Mother principle of male and female equality is a classic. Those of you that don't know, Dr. Theophile Obinga is Sheikh Anta Diop's best student, and I think has exceeded him when it comes to his productivity. Now, Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, nobody's going to exceed him on founding the Black school or the African or Kemetic school of Afrocentricity. He's the master of that. And not just a great master, but a wonderful human being, and one that helped shape Dr. Theophile Obinga and many of the rest of us. For many years in my Boloso period, which is the period of improvisation, the third level in the Dogon system, the chief influence for me was Sheikh Anta Diop, and it was his book, Cultural Unity of Black Africa, because it provided the most comprehensive view of world history. Later, I would deconstruct it. But when I went to the Sixth Pan-African Congress and chaired the political committee of the Sixth Pan-African Congress in 1964, it was Sheikh Anta Diop's two cradle theory, as Dr. Vulanlela Wabogo, or Professor Vulanlela Wabogo describes it, the northern and southern cradle theories, that guided me in terms of my particular orientation at that time. Johnny Johnson is saying Medea isn't the way to rebuild Black families. You better believe it. I tell my wife all the time, that makes me sick. See some man in a dress running around here acting like a woman. And some Blacks will buy into it because they say, oh, there's Black women like that. Yeah, there's always a germ of truth in everything, you know. But the Black woman, which Dr. John Henry Clark called Big Mama, she's not comical. Oh, no. She's dead serious. Big Mama is at the core of this model that God revealed to me that Dr. Obinga said should be in the dictionary. Twinlineal. I gave the name to it, but God gave me the formula. And this is the whole in the part. In this part of Twa or Kun civilization is its entirety in this one thing, this one word, and it's been missed before. And so I always give God credit for this. I could do like a lot of the innovators in science and then just give you the formula and take credit for it. And that's Einstein. Einstein said that his theory of relativity came from a dream, but you didn't hear him quoting God. He quoted himself. But it came from a dream. It came from God. And so I give credit to the source. And I'm thankful that God was kind enough to share this with me. So one of the tools I'm going to be using, philosophical framework, a Dunaso tool, which is within anything is everything, is the within anything is everything principle of twinlinealism, of the just societies of Africa, where all the males and females were equally empowered to govern every phase of society. That's a new revelation. And that provides a framework for viewing history not available before. That's new. It's the greatest breakthrough in historiography, period, because it enables you to see these societies through their eyes and to understand where your greatest strength comes from, what it is. You hear me? So I'll be using this as a tool, the major tool for revitalizing Black families in the US, in the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, wherever we are as a people. The second tool or philosophical or Dunaso tool that I'm going to use, which again comes from God's mind, and God gives you the whole in a part. And this one is the best analysis for understanding what's going wrong in Black communities in the US, African communities on the continent, and African societies in the Caribbean or in Europe or wherever we are. And I'm finding out is the best tool for understanding what is wrong with white folks today. Because, God's mind is so whole. When they give you a part, which is a whole, it's like a spiral, and you only see parts of it over time. And it took me from 1995 when I finished the book, but actually 1990 when I received the vision that led to the twin lineal vision of African societies. It took me until around 2000 to see how it applied to the Caribbean. So when I meet my wife in 2005 in the United Kingdom, I'm speaking at Centerprise Bookstore, and it's Caribbean Africans who populate the UK, mainly from Jamaica. And by then, I had come to see how this twin linealism, and then this second one that I'm going to deal with in a minute, applied. But first, I understood how that applied to the African world. But when it comes to the second one that I'm going to use today, which is a choice between two cultures, this vision came to me from God. And I won't go into this again, but in previous shows, I've explained a student in one of my classes asked me, our culture is so strong, why is there so much erosion now? And God gave me the answer, a choice between two cultures. Those words are God's words. Those are not mine. Came through the light. Some of you will say, oh yeah, the light. What's the light? It's this little light of mine that I'm going to let shine. Huh? It's the light that's in a blade of grass. It's the light that the Twa call Ilani, that lights up the stars. It's the light that is your soul, that is the God within you. I was just joyful that God was so kind to me to share this. I've explained before the beauty of the light on the mother principle, the male-female equal empowerment. I won't go through that. And then this light was a smaller light because I'm asking a smaller question. I'm asking the question of what went wrong in Black communities. And so God has given me an answer for a smaller problem, but it's an answer that provides a framework for solving the problem. Because see, if you understand the basis for a problem, and when God gives you an answer, God gives you both the correct formulation of the problem, and out of that comes the solution. It's not like linear white thought where everything is woe is me and everything is separate. So the choice between two cultures, that will be the second tool that I'm using to really look at why are Black families in the state they're in now, African families in the Caribbean and Africa, not as bad a shape as we're in, but bad shape. And it's going to provide an explanation for the problems that's going on among Europeans, by the way. So these are the two tools, the Adunaso tools that I'm going to be using today. But I wouldn't be able to make these two tools if I had not undergone an awakening, which was a mind, body, spirit transformation. And that came out of the Black Liberation Movement. And that enabled me to begin to spiritually, mentally, philosophically, politically, socially, economically free myself from this Aryan mindset and Aryan system. And it's enabled me to be able to put forward a view and a vision to save the planet from ecocide. And you will not be able to explain ecocide or the genocide of the planet on the basis of white supremacy. White supremacy is not the cause of that. It's a European philosophy that our scholars have not studied. And some of you think some have, they haven't. If you invent a philosophy and then call it Afrocentric, that ain't no philosophy. You got to draw from the depths of African philosophy to be able to see your enemy. If you don't know yourself, you won't know your enemy. And those are the two key things in war. You can know your enemy all you want. If you don't know yourself, you're defeated. That's the first thing you have to learn. And fortunately, I underwent that awakening just as I was entering into corporate battles. And when you have the experience of being able to defeat corporations, you're defeating the power that rules the world. And for 3 years, we ran a city called San Francisco because we kicked the ass of all the major corporations, including the biggest bank in the world. So this is like the key for me. And that's an ongoing process that I call the sixfold stages to mental freedom. It's the key to Malcolm. Without Malcolm going through this, you wouldn't have had a Malcolm X, El Hajj, Malik El-Shabazz. It's the key to Amilcar Cabral going through this. Ella Baker didn't have to go through it because she came out of Black culture. John Henry Clark didn't have to go through it because he came out of Black culture. But those of us who were assimilated, we had to go through it. And by the way, most of us who come out of Black culture, we still have residuals of the slave mentality, which is, again, the over-identification with the master. And for some of us, it may not be the white boy. It may be what you see as the most prevailing force in the world today, which leads us not to believe in Black folks. And we got some very well-read Black folks who are into that, who think that anything that we've done isn't worthwhile because it hasn't produced total and complete liberation. Tell that to the Chinese whose system fell apart and took them almost 100 years to get it back together, the falling apart of the emperor system, and then a civil war that lasted 40, 50 years, and then Mao blundering and killing 37 million people through his great leap forward. China's a civilization I study. Not to be Chinese, I study because it's a part of world history. And it happens to be a part of what I organized in the San Francisco Freedom Movement. And so the Chinese are still trying to get their act together, but they're not doing a bad job. Unfortunately, it's under capitalism. Too bad. Because they got a bunch of corrupt Chinese who are very wealthy, but they've been able to bring 1 billion people out of poverty. It's too bad they couldn't draw more from their own system in doing that, but I understand the pragmatic reasons because it got them into the world economic order that enabled their economy to be able to grow. So this is real key. What's the derogatory words, Gloria Briscoe, that you're referring to? Put them up there. Make it clear. Is that N word you're talking about? Yeah, we don't use that. So, but if you use it, it's a sign of where your mindset is at, because those of us that argue that the N word is okay, yeah, is okay, it's because we're incarcerated into that mindset. And don't talk about if you put an AH on the end of it, it's love. Where's the love? All the death that's occurring in the Black community at Black hands, I can tell you ain't none of those got a sense of African or new African identity. Because if they did, the love they have for themselves would translate into the love of their people. In my case, I love my people more than myself. But that does not mean that I love all my people. Some are not lovable. You know, I mean, every assassination attempt run on me, it was some Blacks who tried to do it. Now, they were sent by whites. So I understand. My people didn't order that. But I understand it wouldn't take too much for this system to hire some Negroes. Just give them a few pennies and they go out and kill somebody because they'll do it without being paid. So I'm thankful for the transformation of mindset, but it's more than mind, it's spirit, it's a totality of being. So my topic is lessons from Ancient Kemet for rebuilding Black families. And so what I want to do is do a brief summary of the relevance of these tools that I'm using. And by the way, the other tool I'm using in this framework for particularly looking at how we rebuild Black families today are the salient lessons that I learned from the San Francisco Black freedom and Black power movement, because we're the only ones. See, the Southern movement was the greatest movement. It busted loose Black folks from the enslavement of societies called Jim Crow. It restored to us the right to vote, briefly visited on us in the first Reconstruction. So that was the greatest achievement. And without that movement, there would have been no others. But the only successful one in the North, across the board, economically, organizationally, in terms of housing, alliances, and coalitions, the impact we had on other groups, giving birth to the free speech movement, which was whites, giving birth to the experimental college, which was the forerunner for Black studies at San Francisco State. It's the only movement in the North that succeeded in doing that, because too many of the rest in the North were too busy imitating the South. So they were doing the marches and they would do sympathetic protests for, the movements in the South, student sit-ins and whatnot at 5 and dime stores and stuff. Or they would do stuff in their communities, and some of them did good stuff. And the best chapter we had in CORE, next to San Francisco CORE, was Cleveland CORE. And the sister who chaired that is still alive. And they had some real successes, but I'm talking about across the board successes. No defeat successes, victory successes. And see, while the Southern movement produced the gain of breaking us out of slavery of the states, it did not impact the economic status of Blacks. And so poor Blacks did not benefit from that movement economically. They did politically and socially and in terms of consciousness. They're the ones that made the movement take place. There would have been no Northern movement without them. No Black Panther Party without the Black Panther Party in Lowndes County, Alabama. You understand? So the key point is that the movement that I was privileged to be maximum but not sole leader of, that's another thing about movements, they rarely should rest on sole leadership, single leadership. We had multiple leadership. I was a maximum leader of it because I led the organization that was the cutting edge organization that produced most of the victories around economics, organizing, building housing, alliances and coalitions, but not the sole. And the main reason we were successful was strategy, successful strategies. And I really want to say this to everyone that's watching this show. Strategy is the essence of power. I've said this before. There are only three things higher than strategy: God, love, and the truth. But strategy is an aesthetic art. It is the highest aesthetic art in the world, next to those three. Because when practiced properly, it frees people. It frees them up. And the essence of strategy is the exercise of power. And I want to say this about power, because I've wielded it. Most people have read about it. They'll say, read the book Black Power. You know what I mean? Yeah, read a book. The essence of strategy is power. And the essence of the exercise of power is situational. And we can always lay out a definition based on what someone else does after the fact. And so that becomes our definition of power. And Huey Newton had a pretty good definition himself, which some of our scholars have stolen and put their name on it. You know, pretty good, not bad. It showed this guy's brilliance. But the key thing about the exercise of power is situational, meaning it's wielding power in a particular set of circumstances. It's the same way jazz is composed, or the blues, or any of our arts, good hip hop. As the enslaved Africans said, on the spur of the moment. Now, it's got a comprehensive view. It comes out of a framework. But in the end, that's what real power is. You're in a situation right now where you can determine who goes to the White House, whether it's a White House or a fascist house. You're in the position to determine that. And if too many of you don't appreciate the moment, the situation you're in, you will not appreciate the power that you can wield. Because in this case, you will determine the outcome of this. So I'm going to be drawing from, particularly in the conclusion, when I get into revitalizing Black families, I'm going to be drawing from some key lessons that the Black Power, Black Freedom movement and the San Francisco Freedom Movement, Black Power movement, learned, that improved the lives of thousands and thousands of Black people and improved none of ours, because none of us took advantage of a single job, and we produced thousands of them. You know, and it's to this band of brothers and sisters of all my organizing in 64 years. Who would expect that coming out the door, your best would be the first? And you wouldn't know that at first because you had no experience beyond that. And that's also one of the reasons why we were successful. We weren't overthinking it. We did think, but you know, we weren't going on what somebody else did, even though one of our leaders did try and do that to a point, and it was helpful to a point. You can't export a struggle. I don't care what it is, a revolution, transformation in society. You're going to have to create it. And yeah, you can learn from everything you've gone through, but it's a unique set of circumstances in that situation that really enables you to do what you can do. I was in Cuba in 83, 84 and negotiated agreements with the Cuban government. Then vice chair, national vice chair of the National Black United Front, a group that I was one of 4 people that formed. And I remember, because I got Reverend Herbert Dougherty, who was the national chair, to agree to do this. He's a very beautiful brother, former head of House of the Lord Church in Brooklyn, minister to Tupac. He was always open to good ideas. So we're negotiating with the Department of the Americas on various things for Black people, which we got. And so it was a sister in charge. And so she said to me, Have you squeezed the orange? Good strategy is squeezing the orange, meaning getting everything out of a situation. To do that, you got to take yourself out of it. It's not about you. You got to look at the best interests of your people and not do stupid. Do smart and follow the 3 W's of mine: win, win, and win. And that none of those are guaranteed. You hear me? I don't care how many victories you have, the next one is the one you can lose. And that's my philosophy. So when I'm in a battle, the first thing I remind myself of is I could lose this one. And so my first thing is to do everything I can to safeguard for victories. So I want to do lessons from Ancient Kemet for rebuilding Black families, Black communities, African nations, and the societies that we're living in. So I start with the twin lineal hunter-gatherer model that goes back to the Kung, who are the world's first people, according to mitochondrial DNA, going back 144,000 years ago. If you read the book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between 2 cultures, you'll see an in-depth analysis in the mother principle, which provides an analysis of 14 African families, ancient African families. So it is God, when God gives me this vision, I'm asking, what's the basis for just societies of Africa? And the vision God gives me, which is a beautiful light without speaking, it says the just societies of Africa were, God didn't say that. Societies where, God didn't say that. And this is what God said: all the males and females are equally empowered to govern every phase of society, period. That is repeated over and over again in the book. People say that's a thesis. No, it's not. A thesis comes from the logical mind. This is a vision that captures the whole of a part, a dunaso, and God's mind, because what was really good about the vision, over time, I realized, as important as the vision is, I got to see how God's mind works. A whole and a part, baby. God's mind captures everything. But it's everything of a part. Because I remember, I've told you this before, some of you that haven't had the show, heard the show, haven't heard it. When George Washington Carver was starting off, he asked God big questions, and he's the greatest scientist of the 20th century, period. Einstein can't even get in his shadow. He said Einstein said George Washington Carver was the second greatest. You had one thing, great breakthrough, theory of relativity, great. George Washington Carver had so many, you can't count them. And George would ask God these big questions. God would say, I can't help you. A smaller question, still too big. God said, I can't help you. But then he asked about the peanut. God said, I can help you with that. Now, that ain't all George Washington Carver did, but he did a lot with the peanut. But here's the thing about the peanut, nutritionally. It's, again, a dunaso. And that little peanut, George Washington Carver concluded, my wife's a nutritionist, she's confirmed it, that all the nutrition you need to be healthy in life is in a little tiny peanut. So it's a dunaso. In anything is everything. Inside of this little edible thing called a peanut is everything you need for health. I'm not saying that's all you should eat, but if that's all you ate, you'd be healthy. That was George Washington Carver's conclusion. But the point is, he was the best scientist in the world because he didn't just get, like I've done 2 things, he had so many things he got from God. But it was manageable things. God ain't giving you everything. So Einstein in the end was looking for the universal theory for everything. God ain't giving no human being that. First of all, they wouldn't even know how to handle it. And that would be the biggest problem because they would handle it the wrong way. Think a white physicist who's got the theory of everything. What you think would happen? It wouldn't be good. But the point is, it's beyond our capacity to understand, and God ain't even wasting God's time with this. Notice I didn't say his. God's an infinite force out there. So the Kum Chua, they're a branch of the Chua, little people. The Kung or San people, they're the first people on the planet. 144,000 years ago, 10,000 years back or forth, their societies were based on this model. Every part of the society, all the males and females were equally empowered to have a say-so in every phase of the society. So the man and woman, that's how the family worked. Balance. The economy, that's how the economy worked. Balance. Males and females. The women had their role, they were gatherers. The men had their role, they were hunters. The extended family community of hunter-gatherer societies, they worked the same way. And when it came to decisions among hunters, they all had an equal say-so, but the best hunters usually got more consideration, which makes sense. It's not like having somebody who's president of the United States that knows nothing and gets to have the final say-so. And by the way, African societies, whether it's kingly, queenly, or based on a group of people without a king or queen, was never one person that had the say-so. The kings in Africa were subject to councils, and those councils reached a consensus. The king had to follow it. My name, Oba, means king. It comes from the Yoruba. Well, under that system, the council of the king, of the Oba, would give the advice. And the Oba is expected to follow it. And if they give them the same advice 3 times and they don't follow it, they get a bowl. And inside of it is a parrot feather. And that means kill yourself. The Iroquois Confederacy had the same system because this system prevailed throughout the world. And if the chiefs of the various nations of the Iroquois Confederacy that were selected by the female clan first and then the male clan second, because they were following a trilineal model, they call this matriarchy. It was not matriarchy, but it inclined towards women. Women had more power than men slightly under certain circumstances. And so when the clan of women, clan of men gave instructions to one of those who wore an antelope's crown, and they didn't follow it, they had one of 2 instructions: club him to death or remove him. This is a system that prevailed throughout the world. And this was for 130,000 years. Johnny Johnson, Dr. Shaka sounds like a true African king leader teacher who is blessed by the ancestors. Well, thank you. But I'm like everybody else. I got my shortcomings and I'm working on them. And I only wish that I knew all my shortcomings. Probably don't. But I know how to correct them, because some of your blind spots, some of your biggest weaknesses are right before your eyes and you don't see them. And that can really hurt you. One of the reasons why, when I led the San Francisco Freedom Movement, I made a decision. There were 2 decisions. Everything else was by the group. One was ask the people what they want. That's why we were successful. We asked the people. And then the second one was decisions would be by consensus. Now, the Marxists, they have, a system where a few people make the decisions. Call it dictatorship of the proletariat. Dictatorship my behind. That's the thing Black people rebel against. So why did I do that? Now, it just so happens I was requiring that we do something that's the basis of African democracy and the basis of African American culture, which is democratic to its core. But I didn't know that because at that time I hadn't studied African history to any depth. But what I knew was that if everybody had a say-so in policy, which is who we going to fight, everybody's got to agree, we are less likely to make mistakes. And that was my main concern. Not making mistakes. Huh? But then it had the advantages of everybody's built into the decision. So who's going to tear it down? Everybody's going to support it. And when there's a victory, everybody was a part of that. Some people were doing one thing, some were doing another, some were doing more, some were doing less. It didn't matter. You were a part of that, and it was your victory. When that victory happened, you could feel good, like a Black man or a Black woman should. You know what I mean? Huh? And so I'm a listener. You see me running my mouth here. I'm a real good listener. And I try and listen not just to what people say, but what they mean. And I was 23 years old when I became head of the San Francisco Freedom Movement. And my vice chair was 11 years older than me. Will Ussery, who had stepped down, was 11 years older than me. You understand? There were people older than me. The person who woke me up, Norman Brown, a cab driver. I'm in my second year of law school. He knows more about how the government works than I did. I'm listening. That's the key to anything in life. Listen. When you don't know something, ask for advice. What is there? There's a saying in Medu Neter that you get wisdom even among the market women. I would say especially among the market women, especially among everyday people, those who will tell you, these are the ones that get ready to skin you. I ain't got no education, but and then they start dropping wisdom on you. You hear me? My father, no education, best educated Black man or person I ever knew. You hear me? And he also had the capacity to predict, which I don't have. Malcolm had that capacity. I don't have that. So the first thing about the hunter-gatherer stage of society, it's the longest stage of human civilization in the history of the world, 130,000 years approximately. Because we know the agrarian age kicks in somewhere around 10,000 BC. Different historians have different dates for when agriculture starts, and it starts with the Kung Chua people, with African women. By the way, as my good friend Kendi Solowazi said, the African woman, and you saw him in the last live show we did, very brilliant person. He said, the African woman's important for many reasons. He's an expert on African women. Please believe me. He says, because Black women make things happen. Ain't that the truth? I wouldn't be the conscious person I am, but I've pointed this out, but for new people that haven't heard it, but for a sister named Ella Hill Hutch, the mother of the San Francisco Black Freedom and Black Power movement, my mother's best friend, who told me, Bill, because then my name was Bill Bradley, you should join CORE. She was a founder of it. I hadn't heard of CORE. CORE what? And when I went to that first meeting, I realized this is important. But she saw stuff in me that I didn't see. That's a Black woman for you. It's Black people in general, a good teacher, a good friend, anything. You know what I mean? So I owe that to her. And then as I pointed out before, the fact that I got at San Francisco State, the FBI was going after jobs. I let them have one. Because I don't lose, I let them have one because the Spirit told me not to fight on that. It was 2 Black women that got me out there. Ray Richardson and a sister who chaired the dance department at San Francisco State, Nansisi Kaya, 2 strong Black women. So they saw something in me they liked. And then Ray puts me in a position where I have to chair Black studies. I did not want to do, but I had no choice. When Big Mama tells you, you got to do it. And some of the best intellectual whippings I got came from Ray Richardson. When I made some statement that didn't make sense with her Gemini self. she would drop something on me and I have to go, oh, I didn't say that again. That's how we learn. That's how we grow. So the key thing about the hunter-gatherer civilization is it's the longest lasting civilization in the history of the world, 130,000 years. It's been reduced to anthropology and not studied. It is the greatest innovative period in human history. The greatest innovations in human history are made. They are the ones who uncover this idea of one God, but it is not the monotheistic Judaism, Islam, Christianity killer cult system of the all-powerful God who's going to, if you turn around, turn you into stone or dust or whatever, you know what I mean? That's the cause of war. These were societies that were peaceful. These were societies in which women, children, elders were not abused. The only societies in human history that did not practice slavery. The only ones. Why? Because when you have societies where men had no more power than women and women no more power than men, there's no room for that. And they were pure people. They were about advancing humanity. And this is a stage of civilization that starts in Africa, moves into Asia, Europe, the South Pacific, the Americas, and, provides the same basis for just societies. 130,000 years of people living in plentiful societies where all the needs of a people were easily met. If there was an ideal age, it was this age. And because in the integration trap, I point out, this is the formative period of human history. Therefore, it's kind of like the experience that children have up to the age of 12. It really sets you. And so if you've got good experiences, when you get off into this, I don't want to hear independent stage, you've got something in you. But if you are not nurtured right, then you can end up being a mess. So if you're in a civilizational period that's 130,000 years, do you think it's going to influence the societies that come? You better believe it would. So the Twa discover God as a force. They have the best definitions. And then the Bambara people, God is infinite force outside of space, outside of time. Best definitions of God. But it comes through them seeing God and being God-like, being pure people. They give birth to fire. They give birth to medicine. They give birth to astrophysics. They give birth to the fundamental elements of civilization. As John Henry Clark said, to be civilized is to be civil. They were the most civil people you ever lay your eyes on. So they pass civilization from the hunter-gatherer stage, women innovate agriculture, and then they give birth to the agrarian stage. And by the way, evidence is pretty clear that they could have entered this agricultural stage much earlier, but chose not to because they understood the labor, work, and everything else involved in agriculture. And why do it when your hunter-gatherer diet is the healthiest diet on the planet? And most of your time is leisure. So why do it? So they made that choice to forestall it. It didn't take 130,000 years to figure out how to mix together different wild plants and come up with, agriculture. So then when we talk about the 10,000 years, what I'm doing here is just making a point that we have much in our civilizational legacy. I'm just focusing on a central point that we haven't, it's not just that we've contributed to the world, but serve as the foundation for us being who we are and enables us to renew ourselves when we're going through crisis. And your history is everything you've been. And if you're not conscious of it, you may tend to move more on the negative parts. And the more conscious you are of it, the more you can draw from the positive parts. But the essence of the value of history is to draw from your past to make it serve you now. That is the real value of history. So when they transition, the Twa, some of them move out of hunter-gatherer into agriculture. Then across the world, you see this transition starting in Africa. Some trace it 10,000 BC. Clyde Armored Winters, 16,000 BC. Different historians have different dates for this. We're not sure of the exact date that human beings transitioned to the agricultural stage. But we do know its highest expression was found in the Nile Valley in the agrarian phase, starting approximately, according to Dr. Sheikh Anta Diop, 10,000 BC in ancient Kemet, incorrectly called pre-dynastic Kemet, because the first dynasties were actually formed in the ancient period preceding what's called the first dynasty, some dated 3200 BC. So we're going back 10,000 years, and this is my specialty. Most of our historians don't study this period. So I'm going to the root. And the reason I'm doing that is, one, I'm being led by the twin lineal vision. When I wrote the mother principle, I didn't know that the Twa or Kung people that founded the hunter-gatherer societies founded Ancient Kemet. I didn't know they were the Anu. I discovered that later, ANU, which is the person with the staff that's on the cover of the mother principle. By the way, the actual pictures coming out of Kemet, they're green. I preferred this color, so I changed the color. So you should know the picture of the Anu are found in Kemet. They're green. And then you have these 3 vertical registers on the top there. That means great ones. I mean, Muhammad Ali said, "I'm the greatest," before he became heavyweight champion of the world. And then over time, people had to say, well, yeah, maybe as a heavyweight. Even Muhammad Ali said Sugar Ray Robinson was the greatest boxer ever, and he patterned his boxing after Sugar Ray Robinson. And Sugar Ray Robinson was there for the weigh-in for the Sonny Liston fight and was there grinning after Muhammad Ali won it. But when these people say great ones, oh, you better believe it. You better believe it. Why is twin linealism important in looking at them? Because the societies coming out of Kemet, all the elements of Kemetic civilization was created in this ancient period, which before this time, before I got this vision of the twin lineal thing, it's been classified by anthropologists into various stages in this ancient period based on the quality of their carvings, their stone carvings, whatever. And in that show that I did on Kemet and the 10,000 year period, a lot of those are shown. I show some of the evidence of this civilization. But it tells you nothing about who these people are, because it's basically a uniform civilization. And so they've got Guernsey, and they got these various anthropological categories that have no application to what drove the people, what inspired the people who founded this civilization. And it is clear the twin lineal system, the twin lineal Adunaso, is what inspired them. And it's clear that these big butt African women, who were the goddess figures, were the central ones in this ancient period. And you find them in other parts of the world later on. And those are Kung women. And they dominate. In one of the shows I've done before, I show that they dominate the burial grounds of this ancient 10,000 BC beginning period. So what's the key point about how twinlinealism contributes to the greatest classical civilization? See, the greatest civilization where people were at the highest level of being civic and creative, or civil and creative, is a hunter-gatherer society. None are more creative. None last longer. None encompass the whole planet. They're the mother, and they're the closest thing to God on earth that we've had when it comes to a civilization, or gods on earth. And they called themselves the pure people, and they were. So go ahead, Risco has a point. I'll get to that one later. What's the role of twinlinealism in this 10,000 year period of the Anu people? What's the key? The elements of civilization, astronomy, the notion of God, the moral principles that guide Kemet, that are listed as 42 in the Confessions of Innocence. The family system, the sharing, the respect for elders, the role of women in society, geometry, the calendar. I mean, go on and on and on. All of the elements of Kemetic civilization was created in this ancient period beginning around 10,000 BC, and it was based, its creativity occurred not through the pharaohs. They come later. Asar comes later, around 4,500 BC, somewhere around there. The age of Shu and Tefnut, that is probably the age in which their first pharaohs come into being. But its creativity was due to the interplay of masculine and feminine, and males and females who were creating out of their souls and out of the balance of society the most advanced civilization in the history of the world when it comes to stratified societies, classical societies, as opposed to hunter-gatherer, which were small societies of males and females interacting with each other. And they did have some slavery. So, I mean, it wasn't perfect. But the key point is the creativity that gives impetus to the society comes from the interplay of masculine and feminine, the creative qualities that are the spiritual qualities that come from the nurturing qualities of the feminine, the creative qualities of the masculine. And when these two are combined, then societies take off. And then the balance between them gives them the peace that enables them to do this kind of societal creativity. It was based on consensus-based democracy. See, I'm not somebody that wants to restore pharaohs or kings. I think the people are the basis for power. It's putting power in the people's hands. And that's how we've got change here, and how Africa will get its change throughout the world, with sisters playing a key part. So it's this improvisation that precedes the pharaohs, that precedes Asar and Aset. And when you understand this, then you can really translate the creative things that the people of this period produce. Anthropologists don't get it because anthropology is a conquest discipline set up to study us, people of color, and it denies people of color having philosophies, having histories. They reduce philosophy to worldviews. These are the people that found everything. So the Kemites and then subsequent societies and some that precede them, because they're a product of Inner Africa. There are many societies that predate the Kemetic agrarian societies. They together create twinlineal civilization. So the other thing I want to stress is twinlinealism proves not only operative in the hunter-gatherer, but in the agrarian phase, the agricultural phase, and and proved operative both in small societies and in large societies. In societies that are highly structured with kings and queens, and in societies that are democratic to the bone, like the Igbo societies that I've covered in previous shows. And it operated in all geographical circumstances. This is one way I was able to deconstruct Cheikh Diop's two-cradle theory based on geography. I could show that, no, the basis for these civilizations wasn't geography, that it prevailed. For example, the Kun people, they give birth to the most just society models in human history, and they're coming out of the desert. Huh? But they don't come out merciless, cold-blooded. They come up with these loving, balanced societies, and they're the first. So it's twinlinealism that really describes the basis for the flourishing of African civilizations. Now, the mother principle, I use empirical data on pre-European and pre-Arabic influences, that is, on African family systems that formed before the presence of Europe or the Arabs in Africa. And I took 14 of them to see. I already knew that what God gave me was accurate. By the way, when I got the vision, right after I got it, I go to Ghana. And I'm in the villages looking at the Asantehene Santawa. That's the king. The Santehene is the king. The Santawa is the queen mother. And I'm watching judicial systems taking place at the village level. And I'm hooking up with Leonard Jeffries and Rosalind Jeffries and Wade Nobles because I was then in Africa. I was both in Nigeria and I was in Ghana. And I was negotiating agreements with the Ghanaian government for African people here, various kinds of agreements. But I was observing the cultural systems, particularly in Ghana. And then I'm fortunate enough to hook up with Leonard Jeffries, Rosalind Jeffries, and Wade Nobles. They had been doing a treat throughout Africa by car. Their car had broken down. They'd finally got it fixed. And then they end up in the capital of the Asantes in Ghana, Kumasi, and they're bringing in the greatest healer in Ghana. And I run upstairs and get my tape recorder and record this, and Wade recorded it. I won't go into that, but it's in the Integration Trap book. And just to say that the greatest healers of Ghana are trained by Emosha. This is a term for little spirits that are Twa spirits that train them in healing, in this particular case, healing of nervous disorders. And so I'm able to do that. So when I get back, I'm calling up John Henry Clark and telling him, man, look I've seen this, I've seen that. And to show you how brilliant John is, John's response is yes, because I'm telling him, I'm real excited telling him about the Ghanaian system, particularly the Asante system, because John had lived in Ghana. He was more interested in the Fanti because he said he was kind of tired of the Asante because he knew him fairly well. And then he knew the greatest scholar that Ghana had at that time on the Asante people, and stayed in his home and stuff and knew things about Nkrumah and stuff. And I interviewed him on this. So I'm telling him, man, because it's confirming the vision that I have of male-female equal empowerment through the Asante Hina system, where the king can't sit unless the queen sits. And it's this male, female, masculine, feminine thing in a highly structured society, much better than the pharaoh system of Kemet, because it's not based on bloodlines and inheritance. You don't know what you're going to get through that. And especially since a pharaoh's marrying his sister, boy, you're going to get some problems, you know? But it was based on the best person principle. And so the person picked this Asante Hina king was the best human being, the one that never lied, the one that never cheated, the one that never cursed, the one that never disrespected women, never. These are societies in which everybody's got their eyes on you. The one that never turned his back on a war party, that was brave. The one that was first among equals in the lineage system, because he was an opinion. He was a lineage head that had first been female and then become male when war came and you needed men in rulership, because in the beginning, women ruled in the Bono kingdom of Ghana. And so I'm telling John about this. And then this is John. This is how brilliant he was. John says, yeah, what I like about the Asante is the consistency of their societies. In one word, he had summarized all of this. You know what I mean? And John writes one of the introductions to the book, Return to the African Mother Principle of Male and Female Equality. So I had the vision in 90, and then I'm in Africa at that time, looking at the societies, because I had written 180 pages. I had to throw it away. Once I got the vision, I knew that was really the guide for where I needed to go, because I'm a warrior. I'm looking for just societies. What's the model for this? And I'm going to tell you, the key thing about this model is it's not only good for rebuilding your families and creating more balance and love in your families and building up an economic base in your communities, but it is the basis for rebuilding society for Africa, for the Caribbean, for wherever we are. It's a basis for societal transformation. Of course, if you're brainwashed and you don't believe in yourself, you will think this is all in the dead past because you worship the white boys. You're paralyzed in front of white supremacy. I don't have high blood pressure. I give high blood pressure. You hear me? I give strokes to my enemies. I drive fear in their hearts. You hear me? But I don't intend to. I'm not trying to. But if you're operating on fear or lies, that's what you'll operate on. So, in the case of the Twa, what we find then is dynastic Kemet was able to perpetuate and create a society that lasted 10,000 years. Now, I think that's quite a bit of time to be passing a civilization on, while many of the Twa continued in the hunter-gatherer stage. And some of them who gave birth to it said they decided to leave it because power wasn't what really inspired them. And they said, real joy comes when the man brings an antelope home to his wife and puts a smile on her face. They decided to go back to that, but they built up this civilization so they were able to pass it on. And a 10,000 year passing is pretty good, but they passed it on not only to the Kemites through the Anu, who are the agrarian Twa, but they passed it on to subsequent civilizations. That is, the civilizations that I study in the Mother Principle. I decided to, because I got the vision, I knew it was accurate, but I had to confirm it. And so I did empirical study. I looked at 14 ancient African family systems. And these Africans that came before Christianity or Islam, the influences that come under colonialism and slavery. And so these included the Chwa, the Kun, the Afrikbo Igbo, the Yoruba, the Suku, the Swazi, the Asante, the Turiki, the G, the Lozi, the Ganda, the Rwanda, the Dogon, and the Somalia. And out of these 14, 13 of these African family systems conform to the twin lineal model. I had Jacob Carruthers, I had 20 of our best scholars review this in manuscript form. Jake gave me the most stinging critique, and I tightened my stuff up after getting Jacob's critique. He was surprised I could do it so quick. Well, I have a computer. He used a typewriter. You know what I mean? You couldn't do this with a typewriter. But I tightened it up. I appreciated his critique. The only family system that didn't conform to this male-female equal empowerment model was the model of the Somali people. And in every rule, there's an exception. Exceptions prove rules. Everything doesn't conform to a rule. There's exceptions. And in this particular case, the Somali exception. And I could give reasons why I think they were exceptions, but they were the only ones. And so Dr. Asa Hilliard, in looking at this, drew the conclusion that according to him, he concluded, he said, quote, I'm quoting from him, "I know of no other comparable, insightful treatment of African family structure based on empirical study. Diop would be pleased." And he's saying that when I critique Diop. He doesn't realize that I knew that Diop's two cradle theory was wrong, but I wasn't out to take Diop out. That's what European scholars do. And I only critiqued the southern part of his critique, what's called the two cradle, the African cradle theory that was agricultural, and he thought was the basis for the African family model that he didn't call twin lineal. In fact, I knew that if he was wrong on the African model, the southern cradle, saying that geography was really the key for African family systems, that he was wrong also on his northern cradle that said that geography was the basis for the northern patriarchal system. So he thought this was a good critique. He didn't realize that I had removed one leg of Diop's two cradle theory and only hadn't removed the other one because one, didn't want to take him down. Two, I wasn't so much interested in Diop's two cradle theory. I was interested in the just society model, and I'm not wrapped up in white people. So, but since then, I've done the critique of Diop's northern cradle and can prove that it's wrong. In my 8th book, I'll go through that. I'm not going to go through that now. But the twin lineal model is the one that prevails. So the twin lineal model therefore covered all the major regions of Africa: northern, central, eastern, western, and southern, because these 14 ancient family systems that I arbitrarily picked covers all of Africa. And since then, I've done many more family studies from different regions of Africa, and they all continue to fall into that line. By the way, anthropologists couldn't see this because they don't know the first thing about African philosophy. They don't know what they're looking at. you know, and all they see is helter-skelter when they're looking at Chua societies. They don't see the pattern. And they certainly don't see the creativity coming from the Chua people. So, why is this important for this topic? Lessons from Ancient Kemet for rebuilding Black families today. The question is, how has the twin lineal family and civilizational model impacted Black families in the U.S. and the Western Hemisphere, yesterday and today, as well as Africa as well? Well, based on my empirical research, and I'm not responding to questions that people are raising right now, I'll do that at the end. And this pretty well answers those. I don't even have to answer them, but I will briefly at the end, because I'm making my points here. So based on my empirical research, the twin lineal family model was automatically carried into the United States and the Western Hemisphere, or wherever else Africans ended up. And we know the Asante, the Yoruba, the Igbo, and Niger-Congo civilizations, all of which follow this model, were the people that came from Africa into the United States. They didn't call their model twin lineal. Much of what we define as different African characteristics. For example, Europeans have the term matriarchy and patriarchy. Africans didn't use that word. And in fact, the societies, because they were twin lineal, they were more female-centered, shared more with the male societies, and the male societies that were more inclined towards males shared more with the female societies, because they were based on a male-female interaction and an attempt to be balanced. And so what's called matriarchy, in a few cases, there were African societies ruled by women. I found none exclusively in the ancient period ruled exclusively by men. But in most cases, what's called matriarchy is a society in which males and females had their own lines of descent. Yoruba, where Yoruba males inherit from their fathers. Yoruba females inherit from their mothers. Where in the family system, governance is in part affected by lines of descent, meaning who makes decisions in the family on certain things are based on lines of responsibility. And so the Yoruba are the exception, where men are the agriculturalists. And in most African societies, women are the agriculturalists, but they are the exception. And so while land is not owned by anybody, the society itself, the right to use the land is passed to males. Similarly, the women, they're responsible for the marketplace. And whatever they sell, it's their money. So they pass that on to female descendants. And so this is a form of twinlinealism. So different African families and different African societies express this. So what's been missing in terms of research on African families and African American families is this twinlineal model. And so we're not looking at the fact that Africans carry these models into the United States and into the Caribbean and into South America and in Asia, where they also build their societies. In the United States, we come under the influence of patriarchy. We come under the influence of the racist systems and the European or Aryan worldview that I haven't covered. I'm not going to cover till my book on the pedagogy comes out. I won't cover that, but it's a systematic look at how Aryans operate. And I'm going to tell you, none of our scholars have really studied this. Jacob Carruthers was the first to introduce me to this, and I tried to build on it and carry it further. So we come under these influences. So the twin lineal model, when it hits the Western Hemisphere, is, of course, and the family model in general, is under attack. And it's not pure anymore, but it is at its core. It's what keeps us going. And one of the things that keeps us going in the United States is the near equal oppression of Black males and females in the US. Women were more oppressed due to rape, though men were also raped, not at the level of women. But generally, when it came to the plantation work, men and women carried pretty much the same load. Women carrying an extra load, having to carry life and then all of that, and the abuse that came with that. So what happens is the equal oppression of men and women reinforce the twin lineal character of African culture. And it means that when it comes to having any say-so among Africans, when it comes to plotting rebellions, when it comes to plotting escapes, when it comes to the basic things that determine how people sustain their lives, it's men and women interacting, making that happen, and especially through the extended family community, which is a carryover of the African family system into the Americas. And so when families are broken up, because we had families all the way through enslavement, they weren't legal, but they were based on love. Yes, in some cases, whites paired people, but in most cases, they gave up on that because they were just simply interested in maintaining the institution of enslavement, and they understood they couldn't control this thing called love. They couldn't control it. And so if you read the slave narratives, you'll see throughout it, that is what's maintained on the plantation. And the extended family community, when families are broken up, then people who are separated from mother, father, sister, brother, they're integrated into extended family communities. And this carries us on through the 80s in this country. So what you see then is with this twin lineal family model and the extended family community, in which family goes beyond blood family members, this is what keeps us going. And when Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction comes and we don't get 40 acres and a mule, we don't even get an acre and a mule, we have each other. And it is what sustains us, the relationship between males and females. And they were all over the place. I'm not giving this romantic thing, oh, everything was great. No. But I'm saying that overall, love prevailed. And it enabled us at the end of enslavement, and this is a conclusion that Naeem Akbar, who is a psychologist and a good one of the founders of the field of Black psychology, notes, we find that at the end of enslavement, we come out normal. In fact, above normal. We should have come out raving mad, crazy, tearing everything apart. You understand? But the best Africans, to quote Zora Neale Hurston, were those closest to slavery, as my wife points out, because they were most African. And they cared more about each other than they cared about themselves. Carter G. Woodson made the point that if you took the average enslaved, and particularly right after slavery, formerly enslaved African, and if they had their last quarter, they give it to somebody who needed it. The group meant more than they meant to themselves. And that sustained us through this Southern crap. My grandmother, who was as poor as a church mouse, everybody's got families like this. when somebody knocked on her door, could be white or black, she'd bring them in, and she had 6 eggs, they got 1 at least, or 2. That was our people. But it was this twin lineal thing of this male-female interaction, interplay, and love that kept us going, that gave us a reason for living. And I want to say this. It's this interplay that not only gives birth to the popular culture of the United States that is centered first on spirit, second on family, then on spirit, then on freedom, then on creative improvisation, and a host of other things that are based on the interaction of male and female, but gives rise to the art form of this country and the popular art form and classical art form of the world. Spiritual blues, the blues that are the spirituals, jazz, gospel, rhythm and blues, soul music, funk, hip hop. And what makes this interesting is it's about 2 interesting subjects: God and human beings, men and women. And if you look at the blues, it's a twin lineal expression of males and females. And it's males and females going inside themselves and creating something new. You know? And the logic of the blues and the spiritual blues and jazz, and the best of hip hop and gospel blues, is cosmic logic, which, by the way, is the logic of George Washington Carver, where the blues are the spirituals, good is bad, the sacred and the secular are tied together, whereas among the Europeans, they're separate, analytical, and used for domination and control. And so real creativity arises from this. It's interesting that our best movements create the same way as our best music does, from the soul. As Miles Davis said when he went into a recording studio with 2 or 3 notes, he said, the best music starts with what you know, and then rise above yourself. That's the culture. So the African American didn't get 1 acre or 1 mule. But from 1865 to 1968, we maintained 75% 2-parent households. 75%, which most people who do work on African families, African American families, have ignored until recently, because with the Moynihan Report and other things, the Black family has been considered as a fractured family, as a family that created pathology. They particularly wanted to lay this on single parent households. There were 25% of Black families where Black women did quite good on their own, even because they also had extended family communities to support them, and the wisdom of their grandparents and great-grandparents to support them. Now, our communities have been weakened by attacks on these systems. But the key point is, what enabled us to maintain 2-parent households when we hardly had enough cents, CENTS's, money to provide for each other? And of course, it was the best way to pool that, but even then, it was very little. When the system was structured to deny capital to us, to deny any means for well-being, which is good jobs for us, and a host of other things, those family systems stayed intact for 100 years, actually from 1619 through 1968. But we have the data from 1865 to 1968. Ella Baker observed that it was through extended family community networks that the Black freedom movement in the South was sustained. The resistance movements came from the interaction of Black males and females and the extended family communities of the South that gave the students who sat in their inspiration and was key to the success of the Montgomery bus boycott, to the success of the Southern Black freedom movement. It was this twin lineal thing. Now, we had men who were drawing more on the patriarchy and who did not want Black women to have a say-so. So you had all of that you had to contend with. But it was the females that made things happen more than anything. And those females interacting with those males made that system move. So today, and I'm dealing with the last tool here, the tool of twin linealism is one, and then the tool of a choice between two cultures as the other. And I've discussed this before. My book, The Integration Trap, Generation Gap, caused by a choice between two cultures, arose from a vision that again comes from God. And I've explained this before. I'm not going to go into great detail, but this came from me not being able to answer a question from one of my students. If our culture is so great, why is it's unraveling? What's happening? And I gave an answer, didn't have it. I realized later, apologized. And then God visited me with an answer after James Baldwin gave me half the answer. He said, since the late 60s, powerful hostile forces have come to bear on the Black community, the likes of which it wasn't prepared for. And then I'm sitting in my study, humble, not expecting to get any help, but asking God, what happened? And again, the light. This is a small light. And God says, a choice between two cultures. And God only speaks to you when you're ready. It's like a good speaker. They talk to you on your level. And I got the essence of what God meant when God said that, a choice between two cultures. What he meant, what God meant, not he, was that since 1968, the powerful hostile forces that hit us were of many forms. The biggest of which was deindustrialization, where good paying jobs were taken out of the country. But it was also redevelopment agency programs that busted up Black communities. It was counterintelligence programs, COINTELPRO programs that killed off Black leadership. It was a prison industrial complex that is, the good paying jobs are wiped out, and drugs are introduced into the community by the intelligence agencies, CIA, as they admit. Then, the illegal economy becomes a major force. And of course, we know in the Bronx, the response of Black youth, with many of the owners of these big apartment buildings, which could no longer be rented because the people that used to rent them had good factory jobs, and those jobs disappeared. So what ends up happening is then you end up with a situation where people can't afford to pay the rent. And so the landlords are just allowing this to go untended, these houses to go untended. So then they have these houses burned to collect on their insurance policies. Between 1997 and 2020, 90,000 factories were shut down across the United States. This weakened labor unions, lowered working class wages, and wiped out America's industrial base because the rulers of the country, the financiers, the ones who were playing with the stock market and then brought it down in 2008 and then got saved by the government while blacks lost 40% of their housing. They made the decision, the venture capitalists, they could make more money off of investment than industry. And why pay these big wages? Send the jobs overseas. And so with this, then what you have is from 1968 to today, only 37% of black families are two-parent households. Only 37%. Whereas for 100 years, actually a little bit more, 103 or so, 1865 to 1968, 75% of our parents were living in, or our families were two-parent households. So a greater erosion occurred in the black family between 1968 and now than for 100 years before. And if you want to go back from the time we were in this country, because as a rule, as a poet friend of mine says, no finance, no romance. Or if there is romance, it ain't going to be in a family. You hear me? So this is the major cause for family, two-parent household family erosion. Now, we know now there are informal families that are operating, right? Informal families. People are in living arrangements that they call long-term or whatever the term is. They're just not, they aren't registering in the data, but, people are living together. And I want to really stress that the heavy hit that was faced by blacks and their families, and the same would be true for whites, is the working class. It's not the middle class. It's not educated blacks, because the 34% of black families that are two-parent households, that's the overall figure. But 60% of middle-class families are two-parent households among blacks. And the same is true among whites. By the way, during this same period, white families went from 90% two-parent households in the 60s to 70% of two-parent households. And it is the main reason that a lot of them are fired up behind Trump, because Trump took a stand against deindustrialization when Hillary didn't, the Democratic Party did. So it is these forces, and by the way, it's the black grassroots, the working class, in this case, field blacks, that created black culture, that carried the best of African culture to America. So when you're talking about rebuilding black families and black communities, it is primarily about rebuilding the lives of everyday working class and poor black people. That's the main thing you're talking about. And that's where your power is in the black community. And the two groups that have been most affected by deindustrialization have been black men and white men, interestingly enough, and particularly younger black men. And that's why you're seeing some confusion. Well, who will they vote for and everything else? Well, they're saying, what the hell have they got out of this system? And so they want to see some change to improve their life, because if you are a young black male, you've got the highest unemployment rate. If you're a young black male, you're lucky to be making $30,000 a year. And if you are, you're probably working a couple of jobs. So the thing is, the unraveling of black families is heavily economic, but it has caused a choice between two cultures. And this is the real key point. As I pointed out in the Integration Trap and others, hip-hop scholars, there's a brother named Bakari, who has done a thing on hip-hop culture, not hip-hop music. He's reached similar conclusions. And there are others that show that the group that's been most heavily affected in the family by these hostile external forces of deindustrialization, good paying jobs leaving, breaking up Black communities, the redevelopment or gentrification, prison industrial complex, the creation of a criminal economy inside the Black community and a culture that competes with, particularly the drug culture, African American culture. The group that's most heavily hit by that are the youth. They're the ones that end up in jail. And Black males more than anything, but the females also. And so any strategy we use has got to raise up the poor. It's got to be directed to the poor. The San Francisco Freedom Movement is the only major movement across the North or in the South, though in the South they had some economic movements that were local. The national organizations did not take this up. We got across the board thousands of jobs, banking, supermarkets, department stores, the hotel and restaurant industry, the car dealerships, over 700 agreements, and these are with industries that produce jobs, thousands, because we addressed what the people said they wanted. They wanted jobs first. If you're going to rebuild families, you got to have good paying jobs. And by the way, this is the key issue in this election. It's economics. And whites are not as affected by it as us, but they're both affected by it. The two groups that are most affected by it. Asians, least of all. The Asian family marriage rate is over 80%. The Latinos is in the high 70s. It went down because of COVID. COVID killed a lot of people of color, period. Blacks and brown. Brown got heavily hit because they were in all of these industries that, they called essential industries. They don't pay nobody anything for. Meat packing industries and stuff like that, where people are being forced to work, not even oftentimes with masks and stuff, catching COVID and dying. 40% of the deaths from COVID in this country, and this country suffered 40% of the deaths of the world due to mismanagement, largely Trump, but not all, but largely Trump. And 40% of the deaths in the United States, Blacks suffered. And we got Blacks running around talking about COVID wasn't a problem and it's a myth and all the rest of this stuff. And, proud that they didn't wear a mask. And it's coming back now. You better mask up. I work out at the Y. People with any sense got a damn mask, excuse my language, on. You know what I mean? So the point is that if we're going to rebuild African and African American families, and I showed when I was doing the interview on REFM, the Jamaican National Radio system, and I asked the sister, those of you that watch this should remember, I asked her, had Jamaican attitudes towards the family changed? She said she didn't know. So she went and clicked in and then came back and said, yes, Jamaicans are beginning to question the value of the family. Now get this straight. The United States of America has the lowest marriage rate, family rate in the world, the lowest one, and the highest number of children born to single parents. And I'm not putting down single parents. I'm just simply pointing out that when you can't afford to be married, then that's what ends up happening. And then it leads to a culture where you begin to question marriage itself. So we've got to understand then when we're looking at the Black family and the Black community, the choice between two cultures among Blacks is manifested this way in a lot of different ways. But the main one is the biggest thing has been the emergence of a generation gap that isn't as bad as it looked in the beginning. Black Lives Matter movements and others demonstrate that the youth continue to carry on resistance culture, and particularly hunter-gatherer, group-centered leadership method culture, with women playing a real important role. But at the same time, while African American culture has continued to be passed on, wherever the corporate culture has conflicted with African American culture, and the two most important areas, and Dr. Wade Nobles and Lawford Goddard have done a lot of research on this, is in the area of individualism and materialism. And in those two, generally, a sector of Black youth especially, when having to choose between the humanism of African American culture and the individualism of corporate culture, will make an individual choice more than the humanistic choice. And when having to choose between the spiritual base of African American culture and the material base of European corporate culture that's rammed into their heads through the media and everything else, the glitzy media, then too often it's a choice of the materialistic culture. And I'm not saying that's true for all youth, but I'm saying that's where the biggest breaks occur. You're talking about bioweapons. I hope you're focusing on this right now, Commissar, because this is what's affecting us and what we have to do in organizing in our communities right now. Now, I've recently concluded that this choice between two cultures does not just impact Black communities, it impacts white communities. Deindustrialization upended a large sector of them. And it's played out in many different ways, but this is the main way it's played out with them. Their culture is not lineal. Their culture is patriarchal. And the patriarchal system has given the man his sense of being one up, even though he ain't ruled much of anything, because it's the elite who have the wealth, the white elite, the ones that control most of the wealth of this country, the 1%. They control probably 60 or more percent of the wealth of this country, the 2% almost all of it. But as long as they had some fairly good paying job that gave them some crumbs, they could get a roof over their head, they could get a car, they could put a kid through college with the help of the GI Bill that was denied to us until more recently, including FHA funding for housing. But what's happened since the collapse of the good paying jobs, since the collapse of unions, which Reagan started through Reaganomics to break up, then the choice between two cultures has been experienced by whites as feelings of hopelessness, feelings of powerlessness, feelings of isolation, and a sense of decreased sense of purpose. And this has led to a high rate of suicide, a high rate of drug addiction, and a reduction of 8 years in life expectancy for working class Blacks over middle class, college educated Blacks. And so it's a culture of despair, and their culture has always been a suicidal culture, but this is the main drive that's affecting them. And it's the main reason for the rise of Trump, because he claimed to be a defender of them against this system and proved to be nothing but an extension of it, a fake populace. So when it comes to rebuilding Black families and Black communities and African families in general, culture and politics, these two are key. And this is the key to restoring good life for our people. So we're going to have to fight for good paying, union paying jobs. That's going to have to be a fight that we wage. And right now, there is a movement across the country to bring union jobs to service jobs. So we not only need reindustrialization, which is occurring under Biden's chip, infrastructure, and environment programs that need to be extended. But what we need is in our own communities, grassroots movements that are fighting to see that Black people get good jobs and that those jobs are union paid, that is good paying jobs. And there's a survey that one of the founders of Black Lives Matter has done of over 200,000 Black people that show that is the most important thing for the average Black person, and particularly younger Black person, is good paying jobs. 1. 2, we need to fight to bring down the cost of housing. Kamala Harris has got her stuff, fine, $25,000 down payment on a house. But $25,000 down payment on a house you can't afford. The government needs to go back into the low-income housing business. Again, when I talk about the jobs, I'm talking about a movement that I participated in and led, and it produced this, thousands of them. You can do that. In a city like Chicago, where you got hundreds of thousands of Black people, you can do it. In Mississippi, where you're nearly a majority, you can do it. You hear me? Because if you're going to build up a Black economy, people have to have money in their pockets so that they can support Black business. And so the second thing you need to do is bring down the price of housing. And how do you do that? The main reason, see, when we built the King Garvey, I told you I'm going to use some of the examples of what I've come out of. This is one. We built 220 units of low and moderate income housing off of me buying 4 square blocks for $1 because we had the power to do it. Lobbying the Senate for low income and moderate income housing. Now we have to fight to see that HUD goes back into the business of building low-income housing, not like those projects that went way up in the sky, but good, low-rise, good housing of 2 types, rental and co-ops, under $1,000 a month. You can do that. We did it in a movement. You can do it with a mass movement. No finance, no romance. Without finance, you're not going to be able to rebuild the family, but it's got to come under African cultural twin lineal values. So these are crucial. And then rebuilding Black businesses. The problem that Black businesses have is 2 things. The author of Black Power, the book Black Power, makes the very important point that Black businesses are the only businesses only supported by one group, Black people, and we don't support them enough. Latino businesses, Asian businesses, they get broad support in this society. But Blacks only get support from Blacks. And we need to be more supportive. But 97% of Black businesses are owned by one person and have one employee. And usually that employee is working at a job and maintaining a business, or starts off working at a job and then maintains a business. So we need capital to finance this. Now, one way is through SUSUs, which in the Caribbean is the thing where people come together, pool their money, and then put it into one person's hand so that they can build a business. Then they put that money back into the pot. It goes into other people's hands. And this comes out of the African system of sharing. We need to visit that ourselves. People in the Caribbean have that. We need to create that. So that's one way. So various ways for us to build up our own capital base. And I'm good, by the way, at economic development. I'm one of the few nationalists that is. They're good at being broke. They somehow think that that's a sign of their dedication, you know? As an African proverb says, poverty is misery. You don't want to be in poverty, but that's the nature of what we face, which is semi-colonialism. That is, we have elements of colonialism, elements of slavery that are built into the way this system operates. And the main thing that this system does that resembles colonialism is maintain underdevelopment among African people. And so what we need to do is be able to tap into capital that will help a business when they're first starting off. So in the case of Kamala Harris, her $50,000 to capitalize business ventures, and she was herself an economics major at Howard, that's good. And then black males have pressured her, and she's come up with a series of things she says she's going to do. Well, if she gets into office, our job is to force her to do that if she doesn't intend to do it already. And so that's the other side of what we've got to do. So we've got to rebuild a black business base, but we have to have a base for a roof over our head so that we can afford decent living that will not kill us. But we need an income that will sustain us and give us a good livelihood. So these are just some of the things that we've got to do to rebuild our families and rebuild our communities. But it is essentially through valuing our culture. And at the heart and soul of this is the twin lineal family culture, the twin lineal community, extended family community culture. And the twin lineal national culture that Africa needs as its model for rebuilding Africa and the Caribbean, for rebuilding Caribbean societies so that people can prosper. People in Jamaica are living in an island paradise in misery because of the World Bank, International Monetary Fund structural adjustment programs that went in and did everything it could in exchange for the aid that it gave to break down the Jamaican economy. So they had a beef producing economy that fed their people. They had a milk producing economy. They had a ground provision economy where all the agrarian crops were being produced, and of course a bauxite economy. And the biggest mistake that Michael Manley made, and he was a good prime minister, he admitted it afterwards, was to ever go to the IMF or World Bank for a loan. That was the big mistake. Kamala Harris's father, who's a PhD economist, who's laid out a plan for rebuilding Jamaica, has pointed that out in his own blueprint. Don't go to them for money because it's like going to the Klan for freedom. You know, whatever they're going to give you is designed to tear your economy down. So it's got to be built up through economic self-reliance, but also through, because you pay tax dollars, your tax dollars need to be producing capital for you coming from your government. And that's a part of what you got with this election. If Kamala Harris is elected, they've got to extend their whole reindustrialization project, support of unions, chip factories that pay a good wage that will be ongoing jobs, because that's to make the United States competitive with China that is producing most of the chips in the world, and it's the key to a high-tech economy and an industrial economy. That's what we have to do. It's only part of what we have to do. We need to be organizing in our communities to rebuild families and communities and using our cultural models, including the model of Ma'at, that is the model of justice and truth that rebuilds societies. So this is just part of it. So lessons from Ancient Kemet for rebuilding Black families, lessons from African culture, from African American culture for rebuilding African families and communities. This is only a part of this, but this is lifelong work. And it is work some of us are already engaged in, more of us need to be engaged in. so that we pass on to our young people a future. And of course, many of them are engaged in Hotep. Kamazar, I'm only going to go through a few. There's a huge amount of comments, but I'm going to go through a few. Why are many humans not questioning the rule of the few imposed on the many? That's a very good question, Kamazar. And he went on to say a few humans decide to construct biolabs on the planet where we live, make rules to restrict our movements, change our wardrobe, impose vaxes, and the many have no control over the source. And I would say this, and by the way, Robin, if you get a chance, attend the New Year's Eve ball that I'm going to be posting that will be in Concord on December the 31st. We could actually meet each other and you get to enjoy yourself. So check it out. I'll be posting it on our site and I hope you come. So yeah, Kamazar is making the point about the weapons and stuff. And why don't we question this? A good point. And the main reason that you have not just deindustrialization impoverishing people, it's a national security state that is committed to war that Truman put up so he could get reelected. When there was no enemy in sight on the planet threatening America, when this country should have gone to a peacetime economy, they kept the draft and they built more nuclear weapons and invented the myth that the Russians were coming. And the Russians had saved the United States from Germany. And suddenly, the friend is the enemy, the Russians, and the enemy, the Nazis, become the friends, and they're rearmed by the United States under Truman so he could get reelected. That's basically what it is. The war in Ukraine, I won't go into it, should not have happened, and it's largely sold based on the fact that on the theory that the Russians are the enemy. Johnny Johnson, big mistake in Jamaica, no bauxite smelter. Indonesia built one, 1.5 billion USD. Jamaica market and tourism makes that annually. The four growth seasons in agriculture, ganja, industrial complex, wheat. Good point. Johnny Johnson, good point. But what ends up happening is when Michael Manley first, because he was trying to rebuild Jamaica along lines beneficial to the people, when he gets caught up in this IMF World Bank loan situation, he wins the first time. After that, they impose restrictions on him, and each one is bringing down another sector of his economy when is what you said should happen. Correct. And also look at what's happening in Barbados, where the president of that country is doing a good job. Built 10,000 new houses for people at a reasonable rate because the price of housing in Barbados is high. Yeah, good point about COVID and why don't we deal with the source? Johnny Johnson, we voted Democratic for 60 years. What have we got? Well, actually, in most cases, nothing. But in the case of Johnson, in the case of Roosevelt, and in the case of Biden, you got something. And that $2 trillion that he put into his infrastructure and all the others, chips and the environment, has been matched by another $2 trillion, and it has bounced up a huge number of jobs. And by the end of this, we'll produce 14 million jobs. And hundreds of thousands of industrial jobs have already been produced. So we better be looking at what's occurring right under our eyes. And that was because Blacks put him in office, coming out of South Carolina. He was in part trying to reward his black base, but the squad in the House, Bernie Sanders, who comes out of CORE, and the others, they leaned on him, and he was willing to be leaned on because at his age, he wanted to go down as a consequential president. So you need to look at that and know that those are things that need to be expanded upon. Most presidents haven't put anything into the economy. This one has. Blacks have the lowest unemployment rate right now. So go look at that. What are you talking about? You're going to vote for Trump? Are you kidding? Trump is the one that produced death through COVID. Trump is the one that when they brought to him a solution for COVID, he said he wasn't going to do it because it would kill Democrats. That means it would help Democrats. That means help blacks. Trump ain't done a single thing for black people. Except when he comes into office, he's going to fire you from federal employment. And don't be surprised that a whole lot of black people are not among the millions that he plans to deport. You going to vote for Trump? But if you do, go right ahead. But do you understand what that means? And don't cite no Marcus Garvey here. You know, Trump's a fascist, and he's a fake populist who does nothing for anybody but himself. Lao Tzu Marimba Ani has a 600-page contribution to the Aryan model. I respect Marimba Ani. We both presented at the 1995 ASCAT conference. She presented on Yurugu, which she really didn't talk about Yurugu. She presented on Let the Circle Be Unbroken, and I presented on the Mother Principle. Her book does not study Aryan thought. Her book studies Plato. It studies Christianity. It does not critique Aryan thought, and her book does not use an African philosophical framework for viewing them, let alone an African American one. So, but you'll only know that when you know what the Aryan view is. And she says so in the beginning. Wade Nobles is a major influence for her, good black psychologist, but that's not African philosophy. Johnny Johnson, most if not all African studies faculties are still white. Most of the departments not actually full staff faculties with real PhD. That's not true. Some Black Studies departments like San Francisco State have their own college and they come up under their own college. Others are departments coming up under other colleges. But generally, these are staffed by Blacks and they have PhDs. The question is, what did they learn in their PhD programs? And some of them have learned a lot. Some of them, it's another discussion. Lao Tzu, what makes George Washington Carver a greater scientist than chemist Percy Julian? It seems in your praise you're not aware that Carver didn't want to teach. What teaching ain't got nothing to do with it. Einstein's wasn't just a teacher, and not primarily. He was a research physicist. But that's not the point. I'm basing him being the best scientist on the world based on the innovative breakthroughs he came through uh, not just in the field of botany, which was his major field, but others as well. And his combination of natural skills with intuition. And these intuitive things combined with his natural skills led to so many achievements in science, it's beyond measure. So Percy Julian, there's a whole bunch of great scientists. I'm not doubting that, but none of them touch him. And what's this about? We didn't transfer our culture. The hunter-gatherer Lineal culture was transferred to the agrarian systems throughout the world. There'd have been no Chinese system without it. And by the way, the hunter-gatherer system was in the beginning the Ainu, A-I-N-U, which was the opening civilization of China as it was in Japan, many other parts of Asia. That was then transmitted to the agrarian systems, whether it be the ones in Kemet, the Yoruba, many others throughout Africa and throughout the world. Native American systems were key in that. Yeah, they did transmit. Johnny Johnson. Hindu comes from root word Indus. The invaders only added the Hindu. This Dravidian Dalits, untouchable people, were our black people game over not Brahmin, Hindu, upper caste like. Yeah, true. The original Aryans come out of Russia, Ukraine, Caucasus Mountains. They're nomads. Originally, the Aryan whites, but they have to mix with blacks. So many of them are dark complexion because they had to mix with blacks. Kamala's mother was heavily politicized by the Black Freedom, Black Power movement in San Francisco, free speech movement, and saw to it that her children were raised in Black culture, for your information. And I have a show where I cover that. And an attorney who was particularly important, who was the founder of Black Dialogue magazine, attorney Aubrey LeBrie, was a member of a study group called the Afro-American Association that both Kamala's mother and father belonged to. And his family provided the main instrument through which Kamala and her sister was socialized. To a preschool run by his aunt, church that she belonged to, and other things. Lao Tzu, does the Creator care for us? All people face something, and usually oppression, and all civilizations that rise fall. Very few come back. And it's based on choices we make. And some of us have lost faith in African civilizations doing anything for us because we're not free right now. Well, that's the point. We got to fight for it. And you got to draw from the best of your culture to do it. Twa maintained their societies against their enemies, for your information. Hunter-gatherer societies were not destroyed. The Aryan society comes on. There's a whole history to that. Marimbani does not cover that. By the way, it's an error to say that it's mainly the Aryan worldview that took us out. It was gunpowder that took us out. It was techniques, by the way, that Europeans got from the Chinese. Lao Tzu. Who's to say that they didn't transmit it to all other people? That's a whole nother subject. But I've done shows documenting that they did. So, that's a whole nother thing. And Johnny Johnson, he's been betrayed by butt dancing and pastors and Black Congressional Caucus, as well as Democratic Party bosses, factoid party, KKK. Yeah, so don't move to Trump. That's like Jews moving to Hitler. You hear me? You want to do that, and particularly if you're in a state that is not a swing state, then go vote for somebody else that's got something progressive. But if you're going for Trump, then you need a mental transplant. You hear me? This is a man that's called Black people every kind of name, that says we're poisoning the blood of this country. Do you know what that means? Poisoning the blood? That's the term that Hitler used. That's a term used to justify extermination. When he says, stop the steal, what he really means, because if you note, when they did that January 6th insurrection, the states where they were accusing of stealing the vote, which did not steal the vote, were all states where Blacks had substantial votes, like Georgia, like Pennsylvania, and others. And he has a view that the Black vote isn't as legitimate as the white vote. That's his view. And he's done everything to steal this election and create another 1876 Hayes-Tilden compromise. You going to vote for him? Huh? Are you out of your mind? Trump ain't using no cosmic spiritual energy. He's using white males, who we outnumber, by the way. Johnny Johnson, World African Diaspora Union. Good point there. Commissar talks about the role of children and their parents. Parents should be a guide, which is important. Good point. Yeah, I went to Commissar. The Trois lack plenty of discernment. They got the higher mind. They got the highest powers. If you don't want to vote Democratic, don't vote Trump. Find somebody else that stands for something. Lao Tzu is talking about the Trois bad parents because other cultures developed. On a twinlineal foundation, agrarian cultures developed in other parts of the world. And then an Aryan culture that is distinctly opposed to this that we don't understand. And you'll get this when my book comes out on Seba and Sodaya, you know. Gloria Briscoe makes the point. Trump stated 2 weeks ago that if Blacks want reparations, he's not the one to vote for. Yeah, good point, sister. You can order a signed copy of Return to the African Mother Principle or any others by clicking into what you see on the bottom of this show. And you'll see a thing that comes up for book orders. You can make your book order. Okay, that's it. I hope Black people manifest essential quality of being a people, which is being smart. Historically, we haven't done dumb as a group, and I don't think we will. So, but I want to say, Hotep, I hope you got something out of this.